observation of his interviews, his analysis, his investigation is superior to what I have seen in many UFO groups of field investigators. And I used to teach field investigation as director of investigations for MUFON LA. So I would rate him an A student. So Michael, can you come up here and put on the mic here and talk? And then we'll bring up Jim last. Got 45 minutes, so we're on schedule.
Oh, we're going to mix in with Jim. I'll just bring up the...
Okay. So,
where are we going to go on here?
yeah, I'm going to put this in the pocket.
I'm all set to go now. Can you hear this? Nope. Okay. You've got to hear this one. The camera can hear this one. Appreciate Bill and Skywatch asking us to come out and help present the case on the Phoenix Lights. Give you a little bit of background. Jim and I have known each other, Jim Delatoso, who you'll meet shortly, since 1976. We were brought together as aficionados in experimental theater and advanced media and really hit it off together. And soon after we got acquainted and were involved in some media technology development, multimedia, he got called into the Meyer case to begin to test the evidence. And not long after he began to design systems for doing that very thing, he brought me into the case to help develop a strategy to help collect the data, but develop a strategy to release the information to the media. I found a renewal in that experience, that opportunity, to an interest I'd had in the phenomena since I was a little boy. Sporadic during my life, but I remember distinctly 8-year-old boy going on the bus by myself downtown Albuquerque, where I lived at the time, with my mother's permission, to see the first documentary, I think, ever in general release on the phenomenon. That was in 1954. And I was deeply impressed then that something very real was going on, and that it fit with the reality that I already had, that there were things out there beyond mankind and even of an inspiring and uplifting nature somewhere to be found in this phenomena. And it's taken me a long time to find that, but I can tell you, coming full circle to the Phoenix Lights case, that I found some very incredibly uplifting things come out of the phenomena. But just since we do have 2 or 3 of the witnesses here, I want to call them up just to give you a couple of points of view on what they saw. But to put it into context here, and fast forwarding to the 90s, when I renewed my partnership with Jim Delatoso with Village Labs, I brought him Tim Edwards' footage from Colorado that I just run across in the news here. I was deeply impressed with it because it looked very much like what Jim and I had seen in 1979 east of Phoenix on June 13th, to be exact, an enormous glowing cylinder that had to be at least 5 miles long. Tim's footage looked very reminiscent of that craft, and so I brought it to Jim, and he was impressed too, and so we went to work on it, and Jim was really the first to come out and validate Tim's footage as this is truly an unknown and unidentified, such that later the Denver Post used the phrase lab certified UFO, so that kind of stuck. So as playing the art director role at the lab, it was my privilege to get involved in the Phoenix Lights case with a view, as we set out to do something we thought would be fairly simple, doing a computer graphics recreation of the events that night. So I put my art director hat on and began to follow behind Bill Hamilton, some of the other investigators who were gathering reports, such that I was able to meet with key witnesses and spend time sketching and and getting an idea of what they saw. Me being an illustrator, I wanted to try to recreate in the context of our simulation to be done what these folks saw. And I can tell you that each time I was able to spend time with them, I was just literally blown away by what a visual picture that came through in these descriptions. As Bill began to indicate, there were multiple objects. What we found early on with comparing the accounts, that descriptions didn't match up such that, well, either people are not seeing or recording accurately what they saw, they're seeing the same thing, different points of view. Things were not matching up until we began to realize that there are really multiple objects. What Bill had identified early on as 4, 5 separate events. It didn't take too long after Councilwoman Barwood got involved, and her office started getting flooded with calls. And she was so open and helpful to turn over that information to us that the event count began to mount, such that we're at 12 or 13, somewhere in there, trying to reconcile now how many objects were involved. We were able to, as things developed and we got more information and spent more time on the case, having people like Strange Universe come through and extra and sightings, giving us more opportunities to spend time with witnesses, we were able to determine that at least 5 objects came through the valley area from the northwest part of the state down to the southeast generally, but at least 5 objects that measured in the thousands of feet. Fully 3 separate V craft came through the Prescott area within a 30-minute period, with a 4th object soon to follow that, instead of turning south toward Phoenix, went east for some distance and then apparently turned south a little bit later to become the Event 4 triangle, or the Event 2 triangle, excuse me. So what started out as what we thought was 1V and a triangle, then we have a jet UFO interception attempt with the truck driver Bill Greiner. And we have the array of lights that were videotaped at 10 o'clock as the other event. Soon we were able to see that there were more than 1V, at least 3, and possibly 2 triangles. There were at least 2 positions at 10 o'clock thereabouts, as Tom just elaborated on, in which the array of amber orbs were seen and videotaped. There were 2 separate positions there at least. Later, when the Discovery Channel people came through and we laid this all out for them for their special to start planning the shoot, we had a struggle all the way through with them, trying to get them to accurately depict multiple objects of very large scale. And as many of you saw the special, they relegated the events that night to simply 2. There's a whole lot more to the story. And I see Jim just stepped out for a minute, Jim Tyson, who's one of the truck drivers. Let me jump to Max Saracen is here with us. He was a witness, along with his wife and several other people, of 2 events, he and his wife with that first group. First, about 8:30 or so, a very large triangle, and then about an hour and a half later, something else I'll let him tell you about. Max, could you come up and give us a couple of minutes? And then Jim should be stepping back in the room. I'll ask him to come up.
Good evening. My name's Max, and on March the 13th, I was with my wife. We were driving up Tatum Boulevard, heading north, Phoenix Way, and we got up to Deer Valley Road, and to the northwestern sky across the desert, you could see this huge V of lights coming across. It was about 1,000 feet up. It was well over a mile wide, and the lights looked very much like airplane lights. They really weren't much different. But it looked very strange and freaky. It wasn't sitting right in the sky. And we pulled off the road, and the other cars followed, and quite a few of us got out to watch the ship. and it came right over our heads, heading towards, in a southeasterly direction towards Tempe. And the first thing that kind of just made you just catch your breath was its size. It was just huge, just huge. And the second thing was that there was no noise from it. It was completely silent, and that was very spooky. And the way it just glided across the sky, it looked very secretive, and you become very subjective when your emotions are torn like that, but it felt that it didn't want to be noticed. It had something to do. It wanted to come in, do whatever it had to do, and then leave. And I remember looking at it and seeing it being so big that it looked so alien. It felt alien. It didn't feel like it was something that humans would build or have the technology to build. And as it sailed away in the distance, my wife and I, we were very silent. We didn't know what to say to each other. And we got back in the car and we kind of discussed it a little bit, and then we went home. And then at 10 o'clock, I went onto my patio, and you can see right down into the city of Phoenix from where I live up in the desert. And you could see the lights in the sky again. This is about around 10 o'clock at night. And I remember seeing two jets to the east of it and quite low down. And one of the jets shot off underneath it, heading in a westerly direction, and kept on going. And the other jet shot straight up, and I thought it was going to crash into it because it came so close. And then its propulsion system fired at the back, and you could see it just shoot off in a northwesterly direction, like it wanted to get out of there as fast as it could. That was the impression it had. And that's when I said to my wife to get off the phone and let's go down into the desert and really have a good look at it. So it must have been about 20 past 10, I believe. We were right down deep into the desert where it was pitch black. And that's when that array of lights started to light up in sequence. And the lights were huge, these huge orange lights, lighting up like bigger than a football stadium, one after the other. And that's when the shiver just runs straight down you when you saw it. It was, it was frightening. It really was frightening to see something so big just hovering there over a city, and to see the stuff that I'd seen before. And then after a while, to see the lights just fade out, you could see way over to the west another orange ball of light, and to the east of that another one, and the one that was further away just faded away, and then after 5 minutes the other orange orb faded away, and that was it. That was my story. Thank you.
How long did it take you to tell somebody about what you saw, and why did you?
Okay, after it all finished, I went home and wrote it all down. And I think it was 2 days later I got hold of Peter Davenport in Seattle. And on the Monday, I faxed him my report and my drawing. And I just felt it was a public duty. I mean, people should know what's flying in their skies.
Did you take any photographs?
No. No.
Did you see structure in it?
I couldn't see structure, but when it flew over our heads, you couldn't see the stars between. So it was pitch black, and I couldn't see if it was straight at the back, or if it was curved at the back, or if it was a boomerang thing, because it was just so dark. It just melted into the sky. But it was a solid object.
Do you still have that sketch?
Uh-huh.
Can you see it?
I have it at home. I don't have it with me. I'm sorry.
Did you have any impression as to benevolence? Any impressions?
It felt enormously powerful. Enormously powerful. I didn't think we'd have any defense against it.
In which way? Good or bad? Any impressions?
Well, as I said before, it was so secretive. It felt like it didn't want to be seen. It had something to do. So I didn't feel that it was a threat. It hadn't come as a threat to us, not at all. But I was reminded of that photograph I'd seen in Belgium of that big triangular ship, and I thought it was the same thing, because it was just so big. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Max. Now, soon after Max and his wife saw this enormous triangle go over, which, by the way, they estimated between them, Max, being more conservative, thought, well, it was a mile wide, but Shala, his wife, said, no, it's 2 miles wide. Well, a little bit later, there was a group of a family coming up on I-17 just north of, or just south of Casa Grande, and Bill Hamilton mentioned this group earlier. As Bill and I had time to spend with this lady, Shelley, or Stacy Rhodes is her name, talked to her and her mother and her daughter that were in the car. And going back and forth, this lady lives right next to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, is unusually interested in aircraft for a woman. As such, is very skilled as an observer, and at various points we brought up known aircraft like C-5A Galaxies. You know what they look like? Oh yes, I've seen those. And the illusion, the larger the plane, the slower they're moving, is something she's aware of. And Stacy said, listen, this thing was so big, and she estimated 2 to 3 miles wide, having a wide angle and a shorter dimension lengthwise. And Bill had mentioned it took them a minute or two to drive under it going 80 miles an hour. It was that much wider. She thought 2 to 3 miles wide, and such that a C-5A Galaxy could have landed on it. Now, let's jump back to the Vs that came through. I thought maybe our witness, Tim Lee, might be here tonight, but let me shorten the description that he provides on call. He's very anxious to talk and tell about the story of his sighting with his family. He saw one of the 3 Vs that came through the Prescott area, and the particular V that came right over their neighborhood, within 100 or 200 feet, believe it or not, right directly over their heads. This particular V did something really extraordinary at that juncture, and then more things later. Our connecting witness in Prescott Valley, Ann and her boyfriend, they were together, saw this V formation of 5 white lights coming from the northwest very slowly toward them. Came right over their home, and it started to do a pivot turn toward the south. As it turned, the V formation went into an arc, or like a half circle, still 5 lights, and the lights went from white to red. And as the turn, the change in formation, and the lights changed color, it all of a sudden just shot straight out of sight toward Phoenix. Now, meantime, here in Sunny Slope, Tim Lee just arrives with his son, Hal Lee, spelled L-E-Y. Hal Lee is sitting, looking to the northeast, or the northwest, looking for Hale Bopp, and sees this arc of lights. And he calls out to his dad, who just gets out of the car, come around to open the door for him. What's this, Dad? They start watching this arc of 5 white lights coming. And they see it moving slowly toward them. And at some point, calling for Mom and the grandson to come outside, the lights go into a V formation from this arc. And they get larger, as if they're clearly approaching. And as they approach further, it becomes obvious that this V is coming right straight at them. Within a mile or two, they said clearly that this was not a formation of helicopters, slow-moving aircraft, but something else again. Now, as it loomed now right over their heads practically, Tim's grandson is going, Independence Day, Independence Day. They thought, oh boy, this is invasion time. But within a second or two of this V passing totally silently right over their heads, blocking out the stars, they enjoy a transformation of peace and uplift such that by the time it's passing, Hal and Damien are dancing in the streets going, Dad, let's get in the car and go chase after it. This is amazing. And they're just totally blown away. Now, this V went on to be picked up by other witnesses that we've been able to construct the flight path and the details such that it went on in lowered altitude, went toward the Scottsdale area, and then did a turn. And then it hovered momentarily at Sky Harbor, perpendicular to air traffic. And as if to look both ways before crossing the street, then proceeded through the flight path and went on down further south. such that it hovered for some time over another group of people driving up to the same swim meet, as it turned out, Stacy and her family. And this family also enjoyed, now it's just coming to light actually, because their memories were suppressed for several months, but they also enjoyed a transformation in their family relationships and more clarity of thought, as this doctor who gave us the report recently described as a transforming experience for them. Now, apparently not too long after that, the same craft decided to park for a while at Picacho Peak. And I'd like to bring up one of our other witnesses, Jim Tyson, who was the first of 3 drivers with his company coming up from the south. Jim, could you come up and tell us what you saw?
Okay, let's see, we run this route frequently between Phoenix and Tucson. There's about 14 drivers and myself that frequent this route 3 times a night to Tucson, or 2 times a night up there to Clarkdale, Arizona. And that evening on March 13th, we keep an accurate log, a federal log, that we have to keep an accurate assessment of where we are within 15 minutes of every given hour. And my log showed that night at March 13th that down at about 8:30 I left Tucson and headed back towards Phoenix. At about 8:35 I got around the, we designate all of the mile markers and the mile posts of Interstate 10 and all the interstates we travel as whatever yard line that we're at. And when I got down to about the 232 yard line, it's where the Pinal Air Park exit is, headed south towards Picacho. And right there the road makes a curve and aims with a straight line towards the Picacho Peak. From that vantage point, it's about 10 miles away, because Picacho Peak makes a curve there at about the 222, 219 yard line. So from about 10 to 12 miles away, you can get a accurate angle, a view of the Picacho Peak. Picacho Peak is about 4,508 feet in elevation, and the desert floor there is about 1,873, something like that. A difference between the desert floor and the top of the mountain of about 2,600 feet. I've seen frequently those people from Davis-Monthan and National Guard reservists train on those aircraft there at the Pinal Air Park, and a lot of them use large aircrafts. Some of the people have been saying that some of the things that we saw that night resembled some activities of a KC-135. Well, I flew with the boomer, the refueling boomer, on a KC-135, and these don't look like that. These don't act like you know, what you'd see from that type of aircraft. What we saw, 3 or 4 drivers and myself, was a craft at the above the Picacho Peak height of that peak, which would be about 4,600 feet in elevation off the desert floor. It was only about 1,500 feet off the highway of Interstate 10 to the east side there, over the pecan orchards, the old pecan orchards that used to be out there between Red Rock and Picacho Peak. When I saw it from that 12 miles away, I could tell that this craft was either coming right directly at me or going the opposite direction away. And then when I first saw it, 10, 12 miles away, it looked like there was 2 separate crafts, much larger than a 747 in wingspan, because it covered that much area. March 13th at 8:30 at night, it's dark, so all you can see is pretty much the lights. So you don't see any red and green corner marker lights, just the 7 white lights, or 7 white lights from each craft. Well, as I got a little closer, you know, kind of watching the traffic and then trying to pay attention to these, I got up to the 226 yard line, which is only 4 miles away there at the Red Rock exit, and from there I could pretty much stay fixated on it. And there's a path in there between the 232 and 226 where the road makes a bend, and you're behind some brush, those mesquite trees on the side of the road. And I didn't see, I could tell then that this was not two separate craft, but one single craft with the 7 lights in a delta wing formation. You've got the one main light in the front, 2 behind that, 2 more behind that, and you're trailing 2 lights. Are the only 2 in this series that vary in intensity. All the rest of the 5 lights in the front have a stationary intensity and a stationary position. They don't vary any. I could tell as we travel this, we're talking about a 20-minute length of time that we viewed this craft from, let's see, we started at the 240 down to the 222 yard line. So we're talking, you know, a 20-minute time. That Kenworth that I drive is governed at 65 miles an hour, so it doesn't drive, you know, more than about a mile a minute. So we got down there close to it, and when I got within about 3 miles of it, I could tell that this is not acting or maneuvering like any type of craft I've seen before. So I spoke to the guys on the radio, the company radio. Our company radio is a 463.95 megahertz frequency radio, so we can talk all the way from Clarkdale to Tucson and with a pretty good amount of clarity. So I spoke to some of those guys behind. I said, hey, do you guys see what's going on up here? Do you see these lights up here? And we're all kidding each other. Yeah, we think that's a mothership. We better call Lamar. Lamar is one of the drivers. He's real spooky-looky of all this stuff. So, and we told him, well, this must be the mothership. Where is he, you know? So they all said, yeah, we see it too. But one guy makes a comment, yeah, it looks like a flock of geese with flashlights in their mouths. And you know, they kind of poo-pooing this deal. I said, no, you guys, there's something serious. Get up here and take a look at this. So we traveled, I traveled on the interstate then with it, like I say, within 1,500 feet of this craft, and it didn't deviate, it didn't move, it didn't change. The back 2 lights seemed to vary a little bit in intensity, but they didn't change direction or anything like that. When I got underneath it, I kind of shrugged it off as I have no idea what this is. It's something that's not normal, but they came up behind me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 15 minutes later, 2 more people behind me who saw the same thing, and they, you know, attested to the story. There's been a lot of outfits who have came to us and wanted us to present our view, and they've called us from a lot of different movie and programs and asked us to give this story. The one that spoke to myself and Gary Morris, they spoke to us a little bit ahead of time and wanted us to develop a script of what we were going to say. Well, they didn't talk to me very much, but they talked to Gary, and in the presentation they wanted us to tell that all these things appeared like just like flares, or they appeared as Luke Air Base pilots, or they looked like helicopters. They looked like, there was a lot of descriptions that the script wanted to portray, that I told them, no, these things you're wanting me to depict of this event is not at all an accurate assessment of what we saw that night. And most of those agencies told us, well, we don't really care so much about accuracy as the story we're trying to present is designed to sell airtime between the commercials at the beginning and the commercials at the end. So we don't really care about. I told them, well, if this is the way this presentation is going to be portrayed, I don't want to have any part of it. So they really blackballed me thereafter. So I haven't been on any of those kind of shows much anymore. That's about the extent of what we saw. A little bit of my background. I've lived here all my life, 40-something years. We live currently 30-something other miles just directly north of Barry Goldwater Gunnery Range. We've seen flares for years and watched them and what they do. My mom, we're just plain old farm people, and we farm out here in Levine by the Levine, Tolleson, and Gila Indian Reservation. Now that fellow, I think his name's Tom King, is that correct? He shot his footage from down at Ahwatukee looking south right over our farm. We farm 2,400 acres from 48th Street to 43rd Avenue, right there along Pecos Road and Williamsfield Road. This runs from Lone Butte west down there to the police station. And we've got a lot of workers that live down there on the premises. And I haven't even thought to speak to them because what you're talking about, the footage that you shot, is right directly over the top of the farm. And so there's a lot of resources, I think, as this truth starts to come out, or as people start to have interest in the truth, which it seems like Francis Barwood's association and encounter with this is that there's a lot of people who don't want to know the truth, or they don't want the truth to be known. And it seems like to me that as we try to find this truthfulness of this occurrence, we'll find a lot of people who will come forward and testify that yes, they did see, and what they saw is exactly what we have testified of. I don't know what. Yes, ma'am.
Can you say what program, the television program it was you did not want to see?
Yeah, it was that one that Robert Stack does. What is it called? Unsolved Mysteries? Is that it? Yeah. See, they gave me a sitting in a chair little interview, and when I went to the airing of that, or the recording of that, I said, well, what do you want us to do, and what are you going to ask? Well, they said, don't worry about. They didn't want to give me any kind of forewarning as what they were going to say, but they asked a few questions, and I know I kind of sounded pretty foolish. It's kind of like tonight. You'll have to forgive me. I've been awake since 1:30 this morning, and haven't slept or haven't eaten dinner since then, so I'm kind of rum-dum right now. But they gave me that questioning on film, and then they were going to reenact this event with we rented a couple trucks, and we were going to go down and do the same storyline. And they wanted us to say that we're driving down the road, we saw this thing, and they wanted us to go to the like they wanted to depict it as we were just a couple of foolish truck drivers who were going to go to the local truck stop and pinch the girls at the cafe, and we were all going to go off and party after the. And I said, and they said that the number of lights that we seen was not an accurate accounting. The way that they flew, the things that we saw, our personal explanation, our personal reflection of what we saw. They wanted us to deviate a lot of the truth of what that was. And I told them I don't. When it came to that night of that filming, I told them, I looked at that script and I said, these things that you're asking me to say is not what occurred that night, and I don't feel comfortable in saying this this way because it's not an accurate assessment. And that's when they told me that's of little value. We don't care about the accuracy of what you saw. We care about the filler and the interest that it inspires, so that people will continue to watch to the commercial preceding and the commercial thereafter, to those sponsors who try to sponsor our program. Yes, sir.
I've got the same question that I asked before. How long was it before you came forward, and why did you?
Well, it wasn't but just the first time that I had any interest of anything that we saw was when Michael Tanner told us or came to us and said that he had heard similar stories, and Billy Griner, the one that works with us, he was at the Glendale Airport. I mean, between Glendale Airport and Luke Air Base, we have a plant there. And apparently, he's the one who spoke to you guys first and told his story. And then at that time, he explained to them, there's 3 or 4 of us drivers who saw it at 3 different locations that exact same night at all different times. Billy saw it at Luke Air Base. Another fella, he's since left the company, saw it down at Casablanca Road at the Gila River, and what he saw was the large triangular craft that he could see the structure pass over the top of him, and he was real reluctant to come forward and say what he saw.
How much time past March 13th was that?
Just a day or 2, wasn't it?
It was a few weeks later.
Oh, was it? Okay, a few weeks later. Yes, sir.
How big do you estimate what you saw?
The craft that I saw looked like it was about 1. Of course, I saw 2 at the beginning. It's quite a distance apart. They looked like there was about 1.5 times the wingspan of a 747. There's a lot of those 747s who train down there at that Pinal Airport, and they do a lot of low-flying touch and go. And those aircraft that I saw were 1.5 to 2 times in size. That as I got closer to it, and it's not 2 separate craft now, it's one single craft with those 7 lights. well, I could tell that formation was probably double the size of a 747 wingspan. Okay. Anything else? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Untangle my mess here. As Jim pointed out, we were led to Jim and the others by Bill Greiner, who is the truck driver that early on emerged with the story about the attempted interception by the jets out of Luke. You might have seen him in the USA Today article and a number of the specialty shows that have aired, like Strange Universe. Bill describes following these two orbs from the Clarkdale area as he was making his 2-hour run from that area down to the plant. Happens to be right next door to Luke Air Force Base. And apparently these orbs were planning all along to be right there and wait for him, and surely they did. And he approached the plant, went in, and began to unload his truck. At this point, the orbs were hovering, one about 1 mile to 2 miles away, and the other some distance away to the northwest. And as Bill was watching this orb up close and being fascinated by it, being, as he described it, like a hot air balloon without the basket, some top-like in shape with a band of red pulsating light going around it. All of a sudden, 2 F-16s, then a third one following, blasted out of Luke at the fast as they could go, he said, and he's very familiar with the sounds there. And they did a steep bank right over his head to head right for this nearest orb. They got right up on top of it, he said, and it shot straight up and disappeared. That was the first instance of attempted interception by jets on March 13th that surfaced. It was a little while later when we finally got all of the reports out of Peter Davenport that were sent to MUFON and somehow got edited such that we didn't get all the information until months later. I read with great interest Max Saracen's report, and the way he described this triangle was about some serious business and was not to be messed with. Gave me a very vivid picture, a little to my surprise, or much to my surprise, and finally getting to interview Max and his wife, that he witnessed yet another apparent attempt at interception. Along the way, I'll mention a couple of other things that came to light, luckily through the USA Today article, and people recognizing the computer graphics image, the illustration that Tim Lee, the witness, made, and many of you have seen the V with the 5 lights over the sky with the saguaro. That's become quite a famous image. We had 2 separate calls of great interest that came in from that article. One from the Phoenix area, where a young man described driving down I-17 from the Flagstaff area that day about 5:30 in the afternoon on 13th with his wife and kids. And the reason he called, he said, I saw a formation of those Vs in the daytime. They were hovering over the Crown King area. There were 3 of them. And watching with great interest, what the heck are those things? They got to be huge. They're driving down. They finally decide just to pull over when a 4th object first appeared as a bright amber light next to the Vs, and then morphed, so to say, into an object that appeared to be triangular or diamond-shaped, he said. Then the next thing he realized, as the 4 are hovering there, all of a sudden they gathered together as if in a giant ball and disappeared. Within a second or two, he said, they saw 2 jets coming up low from the south, obviously from Luke Air Force Base, went right through the zone where these objects were hovering, finding nothing there, did a big sweep over Crown King and went back. The other call that came in was from the Las Vegas area. A fellow said he and his buddy were out on Lake Mead earlier that day. This last instance was about 5:30 over Crown King. About 2 or 3 hours earlier, they're out on Lake Mead. He's an insurance salesman. They're out renting the boat around, had a little day off. And they look up and see, right up above them, directly over the lake, a formation of 8 of these Vs, hovering in a formation. They noticed there was a commercial airliner getting somewhat close, contrails trailing behind it. And as it got closer, apparently too close for comfort, the formation decided to, you guessed it, disappear right before the witness's eyes. Now you start adding up these accounts, and in the context of all the witness accounts that have been accumulating, these are to be taken very seriously. This first one over Crown King happened to match precisely with what we had just pieced together. A couple of weeks before Prescott, there were 3 Vs separately that came through, and a 4th object that went to the east. It all began to fall into place and to match. Adding up these disappearing acts and morphing and turbo shots and hovering, attempted interceptions, what does that tell you? There's a new kid on the block here. There's a force to be reckoned with, and yet that force is so benevolent that it transforms the witnesses. There's something really extraordinary about the March 13th event. Not that everything happened on that day, far from it. We've got now videos before and after. We've got accounts from all over the United States that have come in directly to us from this case. The case just continues to build momentum, and the truth is far from being told. But it's a formidable truth, I can tell you. And if the yardstick of Tim Edwards and his footage is any indication of one phenomenal craft captured on videotape, what that can do, if the full story of the Phoenix Lights can be told, it's a world beater, and it's a benchmark event in all of the history of the recording of sightings like this. I'm going to call up my partner, Jim Delatoso, who will go into some depth of the footage itself and get into the science. He's the scientist, and I get to be the liberal. I get to interpret more. Sometimes we take turns. But from my perspective, the March 13th event was a culminating turning point event, clearly otherworldly, a mixture of military technology, and an arsenal was opened up but not fired. Something really extraordinary happened, and it's only the beginning. Jim?